Regarding the progress of world evangelization, it's also important to notice or take note of some of the global congresses on world evangelization. And the first is the Berlin Congress in 1966, in which Billy Graham, Carl Henry, and other American evangelicals desired to provide a forum for the growing evangelical Protestant movement worldwide. The meeting was largely American planned, led, and financed, and was sponsored by Christianity Today magazine. It had heavy support from the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. And in light of eternity, Billy Graham's ministry in this direction will probably exceed the value of his better-known evangelistic campaigns around the world. Because, first of all, many evangelical leaders from around the world were encouraged by meeting together for the first time. This in itself sparked off many international ventures for Christ. It gave focus, confidence, and direction to an evangelical movement that for a generation had been on the defensive theologically and marginalized socially. And thirdly, it restored to evangelicals a vision for the world which was to be evangelized. The second is the First International Congress on World Evangelization, which was held in July of 1974. And the Congress was very influential, bringing 4,000 evangelical Christian leaders from 150 nations in Lausanne, Switzerland, to discuss the progress, resources, and methods of evangelizing the world. The Congress was called by a committee headed by U.S. evangelist Billy Graham, and the theme of the Congress was "Let the Earth Hear His Voice." The Congress is noted for two major developments. First of all, producing the Lausanne Covenant, which is one of the most influential documents in modern evangelical Christianity. The drafting committee of the covenant was headed by John Stott. And secondly, in bringing to the fore the need to plant churches among the many hidden or unreached peoples of the world. Ralph Winter's plenary challenge was fundamental to developing what followed the Congress. And thirdly, there is a variety of other global congresses on world evangelization. And first of all, we should mention the AD 2000 Beyond movement, which emerged out of the Lausanne Covenant in 1989 with more focus on an effort to evangelize and church plant among the least reached peoples of the earth. So the focus on the African-Asian belt of most needy areas became known then as the 1040 window. And its slogan was a church for every people and a gospel for every person. It became one of the most dramatic movements in history to mobilize the church worldwide for world evangelization. So the climax of the movement were two key global congresses on world evangelization, and they were, first of all, in Seoul, Korea in 1995, and then in Pretoria, South Africa in 1997. The most notable achievements here were that, first of all, for the first time, a list of the least reached peoples, the Joshua Project list, was published, and this provided a factual basis for achieving the desired goal of a church for every people. Secondly, brought together activist leaders from around the globe, and these movers and shakers, you could say, got together. Thirdly, many new initiatives were launched out of this, including intercession, new ministries, regional networks that were formed, and partnerships that were formed to reach out to least reached peoples. And then the African, Asian, and Latin American mission force began to play a much more significant role in leadership and taking initiative here. The purpose of this slide is to show that active witnessing and organic church growth was a phenomenon not only common in the early church and after the 18th century evangelical awakening, or not only, but it was rather quite only common to that period in time. I'm sorry, I don't know why this is showing again. Let's move on to this one. So we can see how This is unique to that early church and later church period. So this diagram um, emphasizes here how the general failure in witness of the post-Constantinian and post-Reformation church negatively impacted the growth of Christianity. So, in contrast, there was growth as a result of courageous witness in the first 3 and in the last 2 centuries of church history. So, the really lamentable 1200-year time frame, which represents the stagnation of the church because of internal and external challenges, and including that of militant Islam, is something to be considered here in this chart. It's useful to bear in mind how much decline in the global church and how much of these declines have been associated with actually Islamic aggression. So, how do we learn from this, and how do we apply it in our current state in terms of the encounter with Islam today? Secondly, we see that the contrasting successful first centuries in which the church grew and spread really through multiple witnesses actually also occurred in the context of persecution. And we see then later, as growth begins again, that the great revivals through the Moravians, Whitefield, and the Wesleyans restored an evangelical passion for the spread of the gospel. And fourthly, we see here this massive growth of the non-Caucasian church, or the non-Western church. The purpose of this slide is really to show how many non-Christians were possibly able to hear the gospel through Christian witness throughout the history of church growth. And so when we look at this chart, we see here that World C represents the entire Christian world. All streams of Christianity have been included here. And World A represents the world population living beyond the proclamation of the gospel, really with no chance to hear the message. And World B represents the non-Christian population with some contact with Christians. And this is based on the World Christian Encyclopedia calculations on the percentage of evangelized. So the vertical arrows here show how fewer and fewer non-Christians were able to hear the gospel, partly political, partly geographical, with mostly a lack of vision to go and proclaim the good news to them. And during recent decades, the gospel has spread to every land and most peoples. During the 21st century, we could possibly achieve the goal of every person on earth being able to hear the gospel if we have the desire and vision to get there. So the purpose of this slide really is to look back at the limited extent of the harvest after a century of Protestant mission work. So this diagram has been slightly adapted from one that was used in another book by Broomhall. It was published in 1887, and it was referenced elsewhere